I was careful. That is the first thing I need you to understand. I was careful in the way that people are careful when they have learned through very specific and very painful experience that the world does not forgive carelessness. Careful with my words. Careful with my expressions. Careful with the distance I maintained between myself and everything that could hurt me. I had been careful for 26 years. And then one Tuesday morning in the bathroom of the apartment I shared with Ren Akiyama, all of that careful living collapsed into two thin pink lines on a plastic stick that I was holding with hands that had forgotten how to be steady. 2 lines. I stared at them for a long time. Outside the bathroom door I could hear the apartment breathing. The quiet tick of the kitchen clock. The distant sound of the city waking up 7 floors below us. Normal sounds. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of a morning that had no idea it had just rearranged everything. I sat down on the edge of the bathtub. My name is Sora Mizuki. I am 26 years old. I work as a junior architect at a firm in the Shinjuku district. I am a male omega who has been on suppressants since I was 18, because the world is considerably more navigable when people cannot smell what you are before they decide who you are. And I am apparently pregnant with Ren Akiyama's pup, Ren Akiyama, who was currently sleeping in the bedroom down the hall with the unconscious arrogance of a man who had never once in his life woken up to news that dismantled him. Who was the sole heir to Akiyama Holdings, one of the most powerful real estate conglomerates in Japan? Who was an alpha in the specific way that meant rooms rearranged themselves around him, and people smiled too quickly and laughed too loudly and agreed too easily with everything he said? Who had looked at me 3 months ago at his company's quarterly dinner, where I was present as the junior architect assigned to their new development project, and said with the calm certainty of someone stating a fact rather than making a request, "You're coming home with me tonight." I had said no 3 times. He had waited. I had said yes on the 4th. I don't know why. That is the honest answer. I don't know why I said yes except that he had looked at me like I was something he had already decided about, and nobody had ever looked at me like that before. Like the decision was already made and he was simply waiting for me to catch up to it. 3 months. That was all it had been. 3 months of him appearing at my firm's building at lunch without calling ahead. 3 months of finding food on my desk that I hadn't ordered. 3 months of his hand at the small of my back in public like he was marking territory he hadn't asked permission to mark. 3 months of me telling myself it was temporary, manageable, contained. 2 lines. Nothing about this was contained. I wrapped the test carefully in toilet paper, then in more toilet paper. Then I put it at the very bottom of the bathroom bin underneath everything else, and covered it with the empty box and stood up and looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. Quiet face. Still eyes, the particular expression I had perfected over 26 years of not letting things show. I could do this. I could figure this out quietly, carefully, the way I figured everything out. Make an appointment. Understand the options. Decide alone the way I had always decided everything alone because alone was the only method I had ever fully trusted. Ren did not need to know. Ren was not going to know. I washed my hands, straightened my shirt, opened the bathroom door and walked to the kitchen to make breakfast like it was an ordinary Tuesday because it was going to be an ordinary Tuesday, and the test in the bin was not going to change that. I put the kettle on. I got out 2 cups because I always got out 2 cups now without thinking about it, which was a problem I was going to address later. I was measuring out the tea when I heard it. The bathroom door. Then silence. The specific quality of silence that has weight in it. My hands went very still over the cups. Ren's voice came from down the hall. Low, controlled. The voice he used when he was being careful about something in the same way a person is careful about a lit match. Sora. Just my name. Just that. But the way he said it turned my blood to ice water. I set the tea down very slowly. Turned around. Ren was standing in the hallway entrance to the kitchen. His hair was still sleep disheveled. He was wearing the gray shirt he slept in. His feet were bare on the kitchen floor. And in his hand, wrapped in toilet paper that had clearly been unwrapped and rewrapped, was the test. I had been so careful. Not careful enough. His eyes found mine across the kitchen, and they were doing something I had never seen them do in 3 months of watching his face. They were afraid. Ren Akiyama. Who walked into boardrooms like he owned the air in them. Who negotiated billion-yen contracts with the relaxed confidence of someone playing a game he had already won. Who had never once in my presence looked like anything could touch him. Was afraid. Of me. Of what was in his hand. Of what it meant. How long? He said quietly. I lifted my chin. I found out this morning. How long have you been hiding it? I found out this morning, Ren. I just told you. He looked at the test. Back at me. Something moved through his face that was gone before I could name it. His jaw tightened. You put it in the bin, he said. I was thinking. You were going to handle it alone. It wasn't a question. It landed like one anyway. I held his gaze and said nothing because the honest answer was yes, and we both already knew it. Ren set the test down on the kitchen counter with extraordinary care, like it was something that needed to be handled gently, like he was already treating it differently than he treated everything else in his life, which he handled with the easy confidence of someone who had never needed to be gentle with anything. He looked at me for a long moment. "Why?" he said softly. "Why alone?" The kettle began to whistle. Neither of us moved. "Because alone is what I know," I said finally, quietly. "Because this is my body and my situation, and I don't—" I stopped. Started again. "I don't know what we are, Ren. 3 months. We haven't named anything. You show up and you stay and I let you, and neither of us has said what any of it means." My voice stayed even through what I considered an extraordinary act of self-control. "I didn't know if this was something you would want to know." The kitchen was very still. Ren's expression did something complicated and slow. Then he crossed the kitchen in 4 steps, stopped directly in front of me, and looked down at my face with those dark eyes that were doing the afraid thing again, the thing I had never seen before this morning. The thing that made him look less like Ren Akiyama of Akiyama Holdings, and more like just a man standing in a kitchen at 7 in the morning, trying to hold something carefully that he was terrified of dropping. "Sora," he said, very quietly. "Yes. I would always want to know." The kettle kept whistling. I reached past him and turned it off. My hands were not steady. He noticed. He said nothing about it, but his hand came up slowly and covered mine against the kettle handle, warm and certain, and stayed there. Ren did not go to work that day. This was significant because in 3 months of knowing Ren Akiyama, I had learned that he treated his schedule with the same reverence most people reserved for things that actually mattered. Meetings were immovable. Calls were taken regardless of hour. His phone existed in a permanent state of quiet emergency that he navigated with the composed efficiency of someone who had been running at full capacity since birth. That Tuesday he put his phone face down on the kitchen table and left it there. He made breakfast instead. I sat on the kitchen counter watching him move around the small space with this slightly bewildered expression of someone watching a very expensive piece of machinery attempt a task it was not originally designed for. Ren Akiyama could negotiate corporate mergers without notes. He could read a room's power dynamics in under 30 seconds. He could make grown men with decades of business experience second-guess themselves with a single raised eyebrow. He could not, it turned out, make tamagoyaki without burning it slightly on one side. He presented it to me anyway with the expression of a man who was not going to acknowledge the burned side. I ate it without commenting on the burned side. We were communicating, I realized, just not with words. He sat across from me while I ate and watched me with that new expression. The one from the kitchen this morning. Careful and slightly undone, and trying very hard not to look like either of those things. His elbow was on the table, his chin resting on his hand, his dark eyes tracking my face with an attention that made the simple act of eating breakfast feel like something I needed to perform correctly. "Stop watching me eat," I said. "I'm not watching you eat. You're staring." "I'm thinking." "Think somewhere else." The corner of his mouth moved. Almost a smile, then it settled back into the careful expression. "How are you feeling?" he said. "Fine." "Physically?" "Fine, Ren." "You've been tired," he said. "The last 2 weeks, I noticed." I looked up at him. "You noticed? You fall asleep earlier. You've been leaving food on your plate." His eyes held mine steadily. "I noticed." I absorbed this in silence. The particular discomfort of being watched carefully by someone you had been trying not to be watched by. "I thought it was work stress," I said. "I know," he said quietly. "I thought so too." A pause. "I should have asked." "You shouldn't have needed to ask. I should have—" I stopped, put my chopsticks down. "It doesn't matter now." "It matters," he said, simply, firmly. We sat in silence for a moment, the kind that wasn't empty but full of thinking. Then Ren picked up his phone. I watched him dial, watched his posture shift slightly as it rang. The particular straightening that happened when Ren Akiyama prepared to speak to someone who required a different version of him. "I need to speak with father," he said when someone answered. "This afternoon. Family meeting." A pause. "Yes. All of them." He hung up, looked at me. "You don't have to come," he said. "Not yet. Not until you're ready." I looked at him for a long moment. "You're telling your family today. They need to know." "Ren, we haven't even—" "Sora." His voice was quiet but absolute. "You are carrying my pup. My family will know today." Something moved through his eyes. "Not because of obligation. Because you are not going to carry this alone. I already told you that." I looked at my half-eaten breakfast, at the slightly burned tamagoyaki he had made with his very expensive hands in his very expensive kitchen because he had put his phone face down and stayed. Okay, I said softly. The Akiyama family home was in Denenchofu. Of course it was. The kind of quiet tree-lined neighborhood where old money settled, because it had nothing to prove to anyone. The house itself was traditional in the bones, but modernized carefully. Large without being aggressive about it. Surrounded by a garden that looked like it had been maintained by the same family for generations because it had. I had never been here before. Ren had never brought me here before. I sat in the passenger seat of his car as we pulled through the gate and told myself I was fine in the specific way that meant I was absolutely not fine but had committed to the performance. Ren parked. Came around to my door before I could open it myself. I gave him a look. He gave me nothing back. Just waited. I got out. His hand found the small of my back immediately. Familiar. Steady. The same gesture he made in public that I had been telling myself meant nothing for 3 months. It meant something. I knew that now. We were met at the door by Ren's mother. Akiyama Fumiko. Elegant, sharp-eyed, the kind of beautiful that had calcified over decades into something closer to formidable. She looked at me with an expression that was perfectly composed and revealed absolutely nothing, which told me everything. Ren, she said warmly. Then her eyes moved to me. And this is? Sora Mizuki, Ren said. His hand pressed slightly at my back. He'll be joining us. Inside the sitting room, his father was already waiting. Akiyama Hiroshi. A large, quiet man with Ren's jaw and considerably less patience visible in his eyes. 2 aunts I was not introduced to sat near the window speaking quietly to each other and stopping the moment we entered. And in the corner armchair, with the energy of someone who had been waiting specifically to be a problem, sat a young man who looked enough like Ren to be his brother and different enough to be his opposite. Loose posture, sharp smirk, eyes that moved over me with the assessing speed of someone immediately calculating my relevance. Kenji, Ren's younger brother. I understood immediately why his name had only come up once. We sat. Tea was served. Ren spoke clearly and without preamble the way he did everything. He told them, all of it. Who I was, what I was to him, what was happening. The room processed this in several different ways simultaneously. Fumiko's expression moved through 3 things very quickly and settled into something unreadable. Hiroshi set his teacup down with a sound that was slightly too deliberate. The aunts exchanged a glance that carried an entire conversation. And Kenji smiled, slow and sideways and entirely unpleasant. Ren answered his parents' questions steadily. I sat beside him and said very little, and watched the room with the quiet attention I had spent 26 years developing. After 40 minutes, Ren excused himself to take a call from his office that apparently could not wait even today. He stepped into the adjacent study, the door not quite closing behind him. I sat in the sudden silence of the Akiyama sitting room. Fumiko asked me something polite about my work. I answered politely. Kenji said nothing. 5 minutes passed. Then I excused myself quietly to find the bathroom which Fumiko directed me to down the hallway past the study. I was passing the study door when I heard it. Ren's voice first, low and controlled. The voice I now recognized as his careful voice, the one with something underneath it. Then another voice, older, his father. I should have kept walking. I stopped. He's a male Omega you picked up from a work project, Hiroshi said. Flat, quiet. The voice of a man making a statement he considered self-evident. 3 months, Ren. You've known him 3 months. That's not relevant. It is entirely relevant. You are the heir to this family. The Akiyama name carries weight that you seem to be treating very carelessly right now. I am not being careless, Ren said. Something underneath his voice went very still. A male Omega carrying your pup after 3 months is the definition of careless. Hiroshi's voice dropped lower. There are ways to handle this quietly, appropriately, without disrupting everything you've built. Silence. Handle it, Ren repeated. A settlement. Generous. The pup would be provided for. You could move forward with the Yamamoto arrangement as planned. Their daughter is an appropriate father. 1 word, but the way Ren said it made the hallway go cold. If you finish that sentence, Ren said very quietly, I will walk out of this house and you will not hear from me again until you have found a way to speak about Sora and our pup that doesn't make me want to end this conversation permanently. Complete silence from the study. I stood in the hallway with my hand pressed flat against the wall, and my heart doing something loud and complicated and completely beyond my control. I had heard every word, including the part where Hiroshi suggested handling it quietly, including the Yamamoto arrangement, whatever that was, whoever that was, including the part where Ren had stopped him. Without hesitating, I made myself move, made myself walk to the bathroom, made myself stand at the sink and run cold water over my wrists the way I did when I needed to come back to myself from somewhere far away. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. Quiet face, still eyes, the performance. Except this time something behind the performance had cracked slightly. Something warm and terrifying and completely inconvenient that I was absolutely not ready to name yet. He stopped him. He chose us. I dried my hands, walked back to the sitting room, sat back down next to Ren when he returned 2 minutes later with a jaw that was tighter than when he left and eyes that found mine immediately the moment he walked through the door, like he needed to verify I was still there. I said nothing about what I had heard. I said nothing about the Yamamoto arrangement. I said nothing about any of it. But when his hand found mine on the cushion between us, hidden from the room's view, quiet and certain and deliberate, I held it back. For the first time. Properly. Ren went very still beside me. Then his fingers closed around mine like he was afraid I would change my mind. I didn't. Kenji found me alone on the garden veranda. I had stepped outside after tea while Ren was pulled into a separate conversation with his father that I had chosen not to witness because I had already heard enough Akiyama family conversations through partially closed doors to last me considerably longer than one Tuesday. The garden was beautiful. Still and perfectly maintained in the way of things that have been cared for longer than most people have been alive. Old maple trees casting late afternoon shadows across pale stone paths. A small pond in the far corner catching the last of the light. I stood at the veranda railing and breathed it in, and tried to quiet the part of my mind that had been replaying the hallway conversation on a continuous loop since I walked back to the sitting room and held Ren's hand, and felt him hold mine back like something he had been waiting to do properly for longer than 3 months. The Yamamoto arrangement. I didn't know what it was. I knew what it sounded like. You're quieter than I expected. I turned. Kenji was leaning against the veranda doorframe with his hands in his pockets, and the particular energy of someone who had chosen his timing deliberately. Up close, he looked younger than I'd initially registered. Mid-20s, Ren's jaw but softer, Ren's eyes but lighter and considerably less careful about what they let show. Kenji, I said. Sora. He said my name like he was testing its weight. Nice garden, isn't it? Our grandmother planted the maples, 40 years ago. He walked out onto the veranda without being invited. Stopped beside me at the railing. She was an Omega, actually. Did Ren mention that? No, I said carefully. She married into the family. Old arrangement, very traditional. He looked at the garden. The family has always had strong opinions about designation matching. Who's appropriate? Who fits the Akiyama image? He paused. Who doesn't? I said nothing. Ren didn't tell you about Yui Yamamoto, Kenji said. Not a question. Conversational. Casual. Like he was commenting on the weather rather than dropping something calculated directly into my lap. I kept my face neutral. Should he have? Probably. Kenji glanced at me sideways. They've had an arrangement since last year. Families agreed. Father approved. Ren never officially agreed, but he never officially refused either, which in this family amounts to the same thing. He tilted his head. She's an alpha. Successful. Appropriate. Everything the Akiyama board of directors likes to see attached to the heir's name. The garden was very still. Why are you telling me this? I said quietly. Kenji looked at me for a moment. Something moved through his expression that was harder to read than the calculated casualness he'd walked out here wearing. Because you seem like someone who makes better decisions with complete information, he said. And I'm not sure my brother has been giving you complete information. I turned to look at him directly. Or, I said evenly, you're someone who enjoys disruption and has chosen me as the most convenient instrument for it today. Kenji blinked. Then he laughed, short and genuine and slightly surprised. Ren said you were quiet, he said. I am quiet, I said. Quiet isn't the same as uninformed. He studied me for a moment with an expression that had shifted into something less calculated and more curious. Fair, he said finally. He pushed off the railing. For what it's worth. And I recognize this is worth very little coming from me right now. I don't think Ren has looked at anyone the way he looks at you. He paused in the doorframe. That's either very good or very complicated, depending on what he does about Yamamoto. Then he went inside. I stood at the railing for a long moment. The maple trees didn't move. The pond caught the last of the light. I breathed in slowly and let it out, and made a decision that I had been circling around since the hallway outside the study. I was going to ask Ren directly. Tonight, we drove back to the apartment in the specific silence of two people who are both carrying things they haven't said yet. Ren drove the way he did everything. Controlled, precise, both hands on the wheel, eyes forward. But I had learned his silences over 3 months the way you learn a language through immersion, and this one had weight in it. The weight of a man composing something he hadn't decided how to say yet. I waited. We were in the elevator of our building when he finally spoke. My father said something during the call, he said, eyes forward, jaw tight. About the Yamamoto arrangement. I know, I said. He turned to look at me. You know? I heard through the study door, I said. I wasn't trying to, I was passing. The elevator hummed upward. How much? He said carefully. Enough, I said. The settlement, the arrangement, all of it. Ren exhaled. Slow and controlled. His hand came up and pressed flat against the elevator wall. The same gesture he'd made in a different enclosed space a lifetime ago, except this time I understood what it meant. He did it when he was managing something that threatened to exceed his management capacity. You Yamamoto, I said quietly. Tell me. He told me. It was exactly what I had suspected, and somehow worse for being confirmed. A year-long family arrangement between two corporate dynasties, never officially formalized, never officially ended, sitting in the background of his life like a door that had never been fully closed. You were going to tell me, I said when he finished. Yes. When? His jaw tightened. When I had ended it completely and it was no longer a variable. Ren. I looked at him steadily. I am carrying your pup. Every variable is relevant to me now. I know, he said. His voice went very quiet. I know that. And I'm sorry. The elevator doors opened. Neither of us moved to exit. I should have ended it months ago. I should have ended it the night I met you and I didn't because I was... He stopped. Because you were what? I said softly. He looked at me. Really looked at me. With those dark eyes that had been afraid this morning and were doing something different now. Something that had stopped being careful because it had run out of room to hide behind careful. Because I didn't know yet what you were going to be to me, he said. And by the time I knew it was already... He exhaled again. I was managing it. I was handling it on my own timeline, and then you... He looked at the elevator floor briefly. You put a test in the bin and my timeline stopped existing. The elevator doors started to close. He put his hand out to stop them. We walked into the hallway, into the apartment, into the kitchen that had started the whole terrible, extraordinary day. I sat down at the table. He sat across from me, and I did something I had not planned to do tonight because I had been planning to ask about Yamamoto and then retreat back into the quiet, careful management of my own interior life. I told him everything. About my designation, about the suppressants I had been taking since 18, not just for convenience but because my previous alpha, a man named Daiichi who had known I was an omega before I had processed what it meant, and had used that knowledge with the specific cruelty of someone who understood exactly what they were doing, had made me understand very clearly that being a visible omega meant being a target. About the 3 years after Daiichi that I had spent rebuilding myself into someone careful enough to never be caught off guard again. About why I had said yes on the 4th time Ren asked. Not just because of the way he looked at me, but because for the first time in years, someone had looked at me and waited, instead of assuming the answer was already theirs. About why I had put the test in the bin. Not because I didn't want the pup, but because I was terrified of wanting things that could be taken away. I said all of it quietly and evenly in the way I said everything, because 26 years of careful living had given me a very steady voice even when nothing inside me was steady. When I finished, the kitchen was completely silent. Ren had not moved. He was sitting across from me with both hands flat on the table and an expression I had never seen on him before. Not afraid this time. Not carefully managed. Something rawer than either of those things. Something that looked like a man who had just been trusted with something precious and was feeling the full weight of it. Daiichi, he said, very quietly. Don't, I said immediately. Sora, don't do whatever you're about to do, I said. I told you so you would understand me, not so you could do something about it. He was quiet for a long moment. Okay, he said finally, the word coming out rough around the edges. Okay, I said. He stood up, walked around the table, stopped beside my chair and looked down at me with that open, undefended expression. Then he crouched down to my level the way people do when they want to refuse the height advantage. When they want equal ground. I'm ending the Yamamoto arrangement tomorrow morning, he said. First thing, not because of the pup, not because of my father or the family or any variable that has anything to do with anyone other than you and me. His eyes held mine completely steady. Because I should have done it 3 months ago, and I didn't, and I'm telling you now, so there are no more things you find out through study doors. I searched his face, found nothing but the truth. And Daiichi, he said carefully. You said don't, I'm respecting that. His hand came up slowly and rested against the side of my face, warm and careful. But if he ever becomes relevant again, you tell me. That's all I'm asking. I held his gaze. He won't, I said. Ren nodded once. His thumb traced my cheekbone so gently I felt it everywhere. Our pup, he said softly. Like he was reminding himself. Like it was something he needed to say out loud to believe properly. Our pup, I said. He pressed his forehead to mine. Outside the city moved and hummed and went about its business entirely indifferent to the fact that in a kitchen in Shinjuku, two people who had been handling everything alone had just, quietly and imperfectly and with considerable emotional damage between them, decided to stop. Yui Yamamoto arrived at 9:17 the next morning. I know the exact time because I was sitting at the kitchen table drinking the tea Ren had made before leaving for his 7 a.m. call with the family solicitor. The call that was supposed to formally and permanently dissolve the arrangement that had been sitting in the background of our lives like an unexploded device. And the apartment intercom buzzed, and I answered it because Ren had asked me to hold any deliveries, and I assumed that was what this was. It was not a delivery. "This is Yamamoto Yui," the voice said through the intercom. Crisp. Composed. The voice of someone who had never once in their life been told they were unexpected. "I'm here to speak with Ren." I held the intercom button for a moment. "He's not here," I said carefully. A pause. "I'll wait," she said. I should have said no. I should have said he would call her. I should have done any number of things that did not involve pressing the door release button and listening to the elevator arrive and opening the apartment door to find Yui Yamamoto standing in the hallway. She was striking. That was the honest word for it. Tall, sharp-featured, immaculately dressed in a way that suggested she had not chosen her outfit this morning so much as assembled it with architectural precision. Her alpha designation was immediately apparent. Not aggressive but present, clean and cool and entirely controlled. She looked at me with an expression that processed several things very quickly. "You must be Sora Mizuki," she said. "Yes," I said. "I've heard about you," she said. Not unkindly, not warmly either, simply factually. "May I come in?" I stepped back from the door. She came in. We sat at the kitchen table. The same kitchen table where Ren had put his phone face down yesterday morning. Where I had eaten slightly burned tamagoyaki. Where I had told him everything last night and watched him receive it with both hands, like something he was going to carry carefully from now on. Yui sat across from me with a cup of tea she had accepted politely, and held without drinking, and looked at me with the direct assessment of someone who had built a career on reading situations accurately. "He called this morning," she said. "Before I came. His solicitor." She set the cup down. "I imagine you know what about." "Yes," I said. "I'm not here to fight for the arrangement," she said. "I want you to know that immediately. The arrangement was never something I chose. It was constructed around us by people who assumed they knew what we both needed." Something moved through her expression. I have known for some time that Ren had no intention of honoring it. I simply hadn't expected— She paused. "I hadn't expected the situation to develop this quickly." I held her gaze. "Then why are you here?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because I needed to see," she said finally. Honestly. With the particular dignity of someone who had decided to be direct because everything else would waste both their time. "Whether you were someone worth what he's about to do." "What is he about to do?" I said carefully. "Restructure everything," she said simply. "His inheritance position, his relationship with his father, possibly the board's confidence in him as successor." She looked at me steadily. "Ending the arrangement formally is not a small thing in the Akiyama world. It has consequences he is choosing to absorb entirely." The kitchen was very quiet. "He didn't tell me that," I said. "No," she said. "He wouldn't." She picked up her tea finally. Drank. Set it down. "He's been managing consequences his entire life without distributing the weight of them. It's his most consistent quality and his most exhausting one." I stared at her. "You know him well," I said. "I've known of him for a year," she said. "I've met him 4 times. But some people are legible from a distance." She looked at me with something that had shifted from assessment into something closer to candor. "Are you going to be able to handle what comes next? The family pressure, the board scrutiny, the people who will look at a male Omega architect from Shinjuku and calculate exactly what they think that means for the Akiyama legacy." I held her gaze. "I've been handling people who calculate what I mean since I was 18, I said quietly. "I'm still here." Yui Yamamoto looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded. Once. With the decisive finality of someone closing a file they have reviewed thoroughly. "Good," she said. She stood, picked up her bag, walked to the door with the composed certainty she had arrived with. At the door she paused. "For what it's worth," she said without turning around. "He talked about you. At the one meeting we had after you. His solicitor mentioned your name in passing and something in his face changed." She opened the door. "I told my family the arrangement was over that same evening, before he even called." She glanced back at me briefly. "Take care of him. He is considerably more breakable than he looks." Then she left. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after. The tea went cold. I didn't move. Ren came home at noon. He walked through the door with his jacket over his arm, and his tie slightly loosened, and the particular exhaustion of a man who had spent the morning having several very difficult conversations and was carrying the aftermath of all of them simultaneously. He stopped when he saw my face. "What happened?" he said immediately. "Yui Yamamoto was here," I said. "He went very still." "When?" "This morning, after you left." I watched his face move through several things quickly. "She's not a problem, Ren. I think she came to make peace, in her own way." He exhaled, set his jacket down, came to the table, sat down heavily in the chair across from me and pressed both hands flat on the surface, and looked at me with the specific exhaustion of someone who has been strong in multiple rooms and has run out of rooms. "The solicitor call," I said. "How did it go?" "It's done," he said. "Formally, completely." He held my gaze. "Done." "And your father?" His jaw tightened. "We had a conversation." "How did it end?" "Badly," he said. "And honestly, which in my family are usually the same thing." He looked at the table. "He'll come around. He always does eventually. His pride takes time." A pause. "The board will be more complicated. There will be questions about succession stability, people who decide what our situation means for investor confidence." "I know," I said quietly. "Yui told me." He looked up. "She told me what you're absorbing," I said. "The consequences. All of it." I held his gaze steadily. "You were managing it alone again." "I was handling... Ren." My voice was quiet. "No more handling things alone. You said, last night." He looked at me for a long moment. Then something in his face that had been held very carefully for a very long time simply let go. Not dramatically, not with any kind of collapse, just quietly. The way a door drifts open when the wind changes and nobody is holding it closed anymore. "I don't know how to not handle things alone," he said. So quietly I almost didn't catch it. "I've been the person who manages everything since I was 17. Since my grandfather got sick and my father started looking at me like I was the load-bearing wall of this entire family." His hands turned over on the table. Open. "I don't know how to distribute the weight. I've never done it." I looked at his hands, open on the table. Ren Akiyama, who walked into boardrooms like he owned the air in them. Who had never once let anything show in a room that didn't require it. Who made burned tamagoyaki and put his phone face down and crouched to my eye level on a kitchen floor because he wanted equal ground. I reached across the table, put my hands over his. He looked down at our hands, back up at me. Something moved through his eyes that was the most undefended thing I had ever seen on a human face. "I have never," he said carefully, slowly, like each word was being chosen from a very limited and precious supply. "Wanted to figure something out with another person before." His fingers turned under mine and held on. "I have never wanted to distribute the weight before." His jaw moved. "I want to with you. I want..." He stopped, started again. The second attempt rougher and more honest than the first. "I want to do this with you, Sora. Not manage it, not handle it. Do it, all of it. The family and the board and the pop and the mornings and..." His voice dropped to something barely above quiet. "Everything. I want all of it to be ours." The kitchen was completely still. My throat was doing something extremely inconvenient. "That's a very large thing to want," I said. My voice came out smaller than I intended. "I know," he said. "I've been trying not to want it for 3 months. Because it felt like too much to put on. Something that hadn't been named yet." His hands tightened around mine. "I'm naming it now. If you'll let me name it." I looked at him, at the exhaustion and the open hands and the face that had stopped, managing itself for the first time since I had known him, at the man who had made burned tamagoyaki, and held a test like something precious and stopped his father mid-sentence, without hesitating, and was now sitting across from me asking permission to call what we were by its actual name. "You're going to be terrible at distributing weight," I said softly. "You're going to try to handle things alone, and I'm going to have to find out, through study doors and elevator conversations, and I'm going to be furious about it." "Yes," he said. "Completely honest, probably repeatedly. And I'm going to go quiet when things are too much," I said. "And you're going to have to learn the difference between my quiet and my fine, because they are not the same thing." "I'm already learning," he said. "I've been learning for 3 months." I looked at our hands on the table, mine over his holding mine. "Our pup," I said finally, softly. "Our pup," he said. The words coming out warm and certain and like something he had been waiting to say. Properly since yesterday, morning in the kitchen with the kettle, whistling between us. Our mess, I added. Something broke open in his face into the smile that I had only seen in private. The rare one. The one that reached everything and made him look like himself instead of the heir to Akiyama Holdings. Our mess, he agreed. I moved around the table. He made room for me without being asked, his arm coming around my shoulders, pulling me in against his side, with the ease of someone who had been doing it long enough that it had become instinct. His chin rested on top of my head, his hand spread warm and steady against my arm. We sat like that in the quiet kitchen, in the middle of the day while the city went about its business, outside and said nothing for a long time because nothing needed to be said. Everything had been named. Everything was ours. 3 months later, Ren's father came to dinner. He sat at our kitchen table, the same table where burned tamagoyaki had been, presented without acknowledgement, and tests had been set down like precious things, and hands had been held for the first time properly, and ate the food Rian had made, which had improved significantly, and looked at me across the table with the particular expression of a man who had been wrong about something and had decided to be present anyway. He didn't apologize directly. He was an Akiyama. They didn't do things directly. But at the end of dinner, he looked at my midsection. Visible now, undeniable, our pup making themselves known to the world, whether the world was ready or not. And something in his face shifted into something older and quieter than corporate pride. The child will need a good name, he said. Ren looked at me. I looked at Ren. We're working on it, Ren said. Hiroshi nodded once, picked up his tea, said nothing else. It was, I had learned, the Akiyama version of welcome to the family. I chose to accept it. That night when everyone had gone and the apartment was quiet and Ren's hand was warm against my side in the dark, I thought about 2 pink lines on a Tuesday morning and a test, wrapped in toilet paper at the bottom of a bin, and a man standing in the hallway with bare feet and afraid eyes, saying I would always want to know. Careful, I had been. 26 years of careful. And then not. And then this. Our mess, our pup, our kitchen, our burned tamagoyaki and our study door conversations, and our equal ground and our distributed weight and our everything. Ours. It turned out careful had never been the point. The point, it turned out, was this.